I'm going to put it all in a PowerPoint as well as some other information and some resources. What I say regarding grief, we all are entitled to our feelings and our emotions. Everyone's emotions are valid. It is not just rude and inappropriate, but it is, there was another word I was, it just should be a no-no for someone to speak on someone else's grief. Everyone experiences it differently. Everyone feels loss differently. And so, grief is permissible. I think I did say it already. I read that the entire world is grieving together. And as such, I think we've seen more empathy because of the losses and I think about when COVID first hit and the center, one of the center points, not just in Italy, but here in the United States was New York, and how I was feeling for people I didn't know. I know I wasn't the only one when I read about, the number of deaths and things that were happening and children not able to go to school and things being closed down before we were shut down here. The level of empathy, I think, increased. I hope that that level of empathy doesn't go down because we are all in this boat together. We're in this world together, and if I'm concerned about you and you're concerned about me, even if it's just a kind word, someone said in one of the other sessions about, well, how do you help someone when you're not a professional and they keep pulling on you? And that's what they do. You can show empathy, love, and concern, but the best thing you can do is help them. Take them by the hand and get them to the professional to deal with the grief. It is a process. It can take years. I lost my mother in 2013, so it's been 7 years. And even though I've worked through a lot of it, I will never get over that loss. I don't use that word get over. There are some days I wake up just laughing thinking about her. Some days I wake up crying thinking about her, but it's still a good thing. So I say, for those of you out there dealing with grief, whatever it is, your grief, your emotions, your feelings, your needs are valid. Let someone help you. Some days I wake up crying thinking about her.
Thank you very much, Miss Stephanie. Miss White, okay. Sorry, for sharing. Thank you so much. Miss Bridgeport, would you like to go next?
Yes, hi everybody. So a few things I want to touch on. And I'm going to be pulling from my own experience having a lot of grief in my own life. And so at the end of everything I'm going to say, hopefully I'll be able to just offer some just strategies and things you can do to help navigate not only your own grief, but other people's around you. So I'm going to be pulling from my own experiences with personal grief, but also in the work we do with Baltimore Ceasefire and at the Mediation Center, just constantly engaging with people who are impacted by violence and murder, and being present with those people. So I won't repeat things that Stephanie said about the kinds of things that people grieve. I want to add a few things that I think we often just don't think about and we don't even realize cause grief. So losing people to incarceration is a huge trauma. And so if you've been living with somebody, if you love somebody and they get locked up, especially for a long period of time, but even like getting that phone call, and I'm still trying to figure out words to describe this without being disrespectful to people who lose people to murder. But because I've lost people to both, I'm trying to find language to really help people understand how similar the phone calls are. So when a homicide detective shows up at your door, or when somebody calls you to tell you that somebody you love died, that phone call, that notification, it is a cousin of the kind of pain you get when you get the phone call that somebody you love is in jail. Because it feels like they got snatched all of a sudden. There's this sense of helplessness that you have because you can't just get to them. You can't talk to them readily. When in studies about trauma in youth, this is one of the major things that makes children more likely as they grow to be violent or to do risky behaviors and things like that. It is one of the adverse traumas in their childhood somebody being incarcerated that you love is actually considered a trauma. And so you really do grieve hoping for that person, and you're worried about what might happen to them while they're in prison, and being able to talk to them and not being able to have the same kind of conversations with them, because even if they call you from jail, it's jail, and there's a line of people behind them waiting to use the phone, and they can't be open and vulnerable and often really pour out their heart about what they're going through and how they feel and all of that kind of stuff. And so you can feel the constraints on your communication suddenly with this person. And so it's a huge loss in people's lives. Breakups are things that we grieve, and I don't think we think about it that way a lot of times. But when we have breakups, when we get divorced, or if there's been somebody we were in a romantic relationship with for a while, and we had hopes and dreams about what this relationship was going to be and what we're co-creating together, and then suddenly the relationship is over, there needs to be a grieving period about grieving your hopes and dreams and what you thought was going to happen that's now not going to happen, and who you were, things you were planning to do in your life together. And just even grieving, like, well, what am I going to do now that I'm not with this person? And, even thinking about dating again and all of that kind of stuff. Like, we have to allow ourselves that grief process, because there was a death of something really important in your life, and you feel torn on the inside because, you feel torn away from something that was a part of you. I have experienced, because there's so much murder. So I've been seeing, I'm turning 48 next month, and I have been losing people to violence since I was 12 years old. And I noticed in my late 20s and early 30s, I had this really bad bout with depression, and it had to do with me, two things. So there's survivor's guilt and survivor's remorse, or whatever, pick a word, guilt or remorse. But there's this thing you go through when you come from an environment where, as you grow up, either a lot of people you grew up with are being killed, they're being incarcerated, or they're being lost to drug addiction. And so even when you do run into them on the street, you don't hardly recognize who they are, because how addiction is ravaging their actual body. And so when I was in my early 30s, I started feeling like I was looking around and I was like one of the only ones left, that I grew up with. Or in even of those of us who are left, looking around and realizing how many of us are actually healthy and happy and walking in our purpose and, all of that kind of stuff. And so I started feeling really lonely and sad and guilty. Like, why am I still here? Why am I making it? I came out of the same circumstances that all of these other people did. Who am I that I get to still be halfway okay, And in talking to people about it, my therapist actually pointed out that a lot of it had to do with, because I lost so many people, I was experiencing something you're not supposed to feel until you're a senior citizen, until you're an elder, right? So elders experience that, they look around and they're one of the only ones left, because so many people have died. That's a guarantee. If you turn 90, you're going to look around. It's not a whole bunch of your people still around. You might be the last person left in your family. Like my grandma is the last, her parents are dead and all her siblings are dead. So she's literally not just the matriarch of our entire family, but there's nobody else in her nuclear family that's still here. And she's 90 years old, right? But in my early 30s, I started feeling that way. Right. And I think that's something that we don't often pay attention to or really notice. And then also, when you experience certain kinds of trauma, you grieve the you that you were used to being. So, for example, I've been raped twice in my life. And after the both by men that I knew and trusted, and both times in my own home. And so after the first time, I went through a grief and a loneliness because I was afraid to tell anybody that I had been raped, right? And I was a grown up, but I was embarrassed, and I was afraid that people would say it was my fault and all kinds of stuff. And so for years, I didn't say it out loud. I really believed that if I said the words out of my mouth, that I was just going to fall to the floor and maybe not ever get back up. Like that, just saying those three words, I was raped. I couldn't imagine saying it. And so instead, I hid it for years. And even by the time I said it out loud, unearthing all of that guilt and shame and pain, and should I have fought him harder, and should I have, like all of that stuff, the me that I thought I was. Had somebody ever told me that I would be in that situation before that day, I would have been like, oh no, because I would, I wish somebody would. I would bust him aside his hip, you know what I mean? But at the time that it was happening, I kept looking over from my bed. There was a lamp right on the nightstand, and I kept debating in my head, do I pick up this lamp and bust him over his head with it? And all of the things that played out in my mind about what might happen if I do that. He could kill me. I lived upstairs. My grandmom has a duplex, and at the time I lived upstairs with my 2-year-old child. And so I played out like, if I hit him and I can't get away, or even if I do, what is he going to do to me and my child and my grandmom? Like right now, only me and him know that this is happening right now. But if I escalate things into attacking him back, my whole house can be in an upheaval. And then, like all of those kind of things I struggled with. And so the me that I thought I was, I had to grieve and accept that. And then the second time I was raped, I literally forgot that it happened. And what I mean is, years later, so I stopped speaking to the guy, and then years later, Facebook became a thing. And he inboxed me on Facebook, and when I first saw the message, I was like, I knew I didn't like him for some reason, but I couldn't, remember what it was. And then I kept thinking, okay, well, if I can't remember why I'm mad at him, maybe it wasn't anything that bad. So I was just chit-chat with him, right? And so that's what I did. I was like, hey, how you doing? Blah, blah, blah. We chit-chatted, and I mentioned it to one of my girlfriends. And she was like, what are you doing? We don't like him. We don't talk to him. And I was like, what you mean we don't talk to him? She was like, we don't like people who put their penis in you without your permission and held you down. And I was like, oh my, I could not believe that it was gone out of my memory. And so then it felt like my own mind had failed. And so grieving again, something that I take a lot of pride in the brilliance of my mind. And so to be in a space where my mind wasn't holding what I felt like was really important information was really traumatic and took some grief. There's this thing that people talk about where the question, does time heal all wounds? So my thoughts around that are, especially when it comes to death, I think it's actually merciful that it takes your entire life to actually grieve someone that you lost, who you really loved. And the reason I say that is because when you think about your grief process, you can have good days. Time will go by, it'll be 10 years later, and people are looking at you like, oh, well, you shouldn't be as hurt as bad. But sometimes, when my brother was dead for 10 years, he'd been killed in 2007. So in 2017, when I started the ceasefire, I grieved like he had just been killed. Because to me, time proved that he really wasn't coming back. The part of you that's like, well, maybe, the longer time goes, you had the acceptance of oh, wow, I'm really not gonna hug him, hear his voice, all of that kind of stuff. So sometimes time actually makes it worse. And so what my mom said, so this thing about it taking your whole life to grieve, I think that's merciful that Um, it ebbs and flows. You can have good days, and then the wind might blow a certain way a day, and you fall to pieces. Or a song comes on, or there's a smell in the air, or something, and suddenly you just fall to pieces. And you may have been fine for months, but I think that happens over your lifetime because if in the beginning of your grief, when the person first dies, if you felt all of everything you were going to go through for the rest of your life about this, right now in the beginning, we would not be able to survive it. You wouldn't be able to handle all of the pain that you're going to go through the rest of your life about this thing. It's like it gets allowed to be stretched out over time, so that it's not just a constant thing on you. Even if you think about the person every day, sometimes you think about them with joy and laughter, and so over time you learn those things. And for me, I learned to have a new relationship with the person because they're not in a body that I can recognize anymore, but I believe that our spirits are eternal, and so their essence is still a real thing. I just now have to learn how to recognize them now that they're not in the body that I'm used to seeing. My mom describes it because, she's a mother who lost her child to violence. She describes it as it's not necessarily that time has healed that wound for her, but she's now accepted that you just live with a wound for the rest of your life. And so when you think about what happens with wounds, they scab over sometimes, right? But then over time, something might happen that just rips the scab off suddenly, right? And so the pain is fresh. Or even if it leaves a scar, right? Sometimes things happen that irritate that part of your body and remind you of so she says that you live with a wound for the rest of your life. And so that means you have to take care of that wound. You have to do the work of taking care of yourself when things about the wound arise. And people really do grieve in their own way. And so there's not like a science to how you should grieve and how you shouldn't and how often you should talk about it. And there's not a science to it because each person is finding out as they are in it what their grief process is going to look and feel like. Thinking about COVID-19, the impact that it's having around grief and loss specifically, that the fact that we can't do funerals and repasts the way that we are used to, the gathering and the coming together and the memorializing people is very different, and that's extremely hard. We've seen an increase, so because there's so much trauma already, there are already epidemics that are, already in motion, and then here comes this pandemic. And so what we see is there's an increase in domestic violence. There's an increase in women being murdered in their relationships because people have been forced to be in close proximity, staying in the house with each other more. And so conflicts and all kinds of stuff, right, have escalated. And so not just an increase in domestic violence and the murder of women, but an increase in youth suicide attempts as well. An increase in parents putting their children out of the house. An increase in young people running away from home, right? And so because there's been already the trauma and the epidemics that those families were already dealing with, this one more thing for a lot of people is making people react in ways that you would think, well, why would you put your child out at a time like this? Right? But for some people, like having to stay in together is kind of their final straw, and they don't know really what else to do. So just a few of my thoughts about things we can do. So when you are trying to help somebody else who is experiencing grief, watch your mouth. People say the stupidest stuff when you lose somebody like, it's okay. Shutting up is always a viable option. Like, it really is. Just saying, I'm here for you, whatever you need. But I find that so people would say things to my mother, and as I work with parents who lose their children to violence, this is a thing that people will say to them if they had more than one child and they lost one child. They'll say, "Oh, well, you still got other kids." I'm sorry, what? Like, and my mom would say, "But I don't." My brother's name was Corny. I don't have any more of him though. Like, there's no extra ones of him laying around. Yes, I have other children, but none of them are him. And that's the loss that I'm grieving. So it doesn't matter that you have other children. And then people sometimes also do like, I call it like a grief and trauma competition with you sometimes. And so, for example, I posted about how my son, my 21-year-old son in 2019, was surrounded by 4 police officers out of the blue with guns drawn in his face while he was in the car. Traumatized my family in ways I still can't I didn't talk about it until this year when Ahmaud Arbery was killed by police officers. That triggered me to tell my story about my son. And somebody came and said, "Well, at least your son is still alive. Mine got killed in the streets. And people only care when the police kill somebody." And I'm like, first of all, do you know who I am? Like, I show up at every murder spot in the city. I'm not the person to even say this to. But still, don't start a comment to somebody with, "At least you still have." Like, I'm grieving what I lost. I'm grieving what happened to us. I'm dealing with the trauma of what I'm actually going through. There's enough pain to go around for everybody. We don't have to compete with one another about, well, at least yours is easier than mine, because you don't know what that means for me to know that my son was surrounded by 4 police officers and getting that phone call from him at 12:30 at night when he was missing. In our mind, my child was missing all day. And I kept saying, this is not just his phone is dead. I could feel it in the depths of my bones that something was not right with my son. And so when my phone rang at 12:30 and he called from the jail, I was relieved and shattered all at the same time, and I have a right to that, and it shouldn't be compared to somebody else's pain that they think is worse. Don't say things to people like it'll get better when they're first dealing with a loss. Shut up. I can't imagine how it's going to get better. Like, even think about when you first break up with somebody. If somebody come along like, "Oh, you love again," shut up. It's not time to think about that I'm going to love again. And like, I shouldn't be thinking about that right now. I got to get through this loss first before I start thinking about how much love I'm going to get again. This is not the time for that. And especially when somebody dies, I know we often don't know what to say, but telling people, it's going to get better, that already sets people up for failure, because what if they don't feel better about it a year from now? What if 2 years from now they're still depressed about it? You know what I mean? And when people keep telling them it's going to get better, then it makes them think there's something wrong with them, because it's not getting better for them, right? And so instead you can say things like, so I learned not to say to people, what do you need? What can I help you with? Because often when you're in the midst of that kind of trauma, you have no clue what you need. You can't even think about what you could possibly need. So instead of asking people, well, let me know if you need anything, I'm grieving. I'm not going to call you and say nothing. I'm going in the cocoon and I'm not coming out, right? And so instead of saying, putting the onus on the grieving person to let you know when they need to reach out to you, let them know, you know what, I'm going to be checking on you. I'm just going to be checking in to see what you need, right? And then follow through with it. Like, really do it. And do it after the funeral is over. After people stop bringing chicken and macaroni and cheese and everything, and nobody else is showing up because the burial has happened and everybody went back to their life, you can be that person that still checks in and says, "Hey, I'm just checking in on you. You need anything? What can I do? You need to talk, like just check in with people, really. Um, Also, I find rituals really helpful. So we do sacred space rituals where we literally, every time somebody is killed in the city, the Baltimore Ceasefire 365 movement, we show up at every murder location. And we put our bodies in the spot where this person's body fell so that their body is not alone in that experience. And so that we're putting our life and love-filled bodies in that space where their bodies fell, to honor that their life mattered and that it matters to us that we lost somebody to violence. And so just the ritual of showing up like that constantly and consistently, not only has it been a blessing and a miracle in my personal journey just because of the things that happened, but we're now seeing that Baltimore, so we burn sage and frankincense, right, because we're cleansing the space. And so now it is this thing where when people see smoke, they just start going, oh, it's the ceasefire people. Like they know it. And so seeing smoke is a trigger for people to know that healing is happening in their neighborhood, that love has shown up in their neighborhood. And people literally like pull their cars over and get out and be like, oh yeah, I'm stopping traffic for a minute, but can you put some sage smoke around me, right? So we just tell people, yep, come on and get the smoke, so having some kind of ritual thing that you're able to do when there's a consistent kind of loss that's happening, like find something that you can consistently do. So for us, the mindset is with murder is a very prevalent, arrogant energy. So we have to be just as persistent as that energy. We got to show up just as much as it does. And so we're going toe to toe with murder so that it doesn't have the last say in that space. The last say was life and love and light got left right there. And that actually means a lot. And so the last thing I want to say is that whatever it is you're trying to do or help somebody with, you got to be doing your own healing work because you cannot give what you don't have. I know sometimes people join support groups, and they end up finding them to be toxic spaces because some of the people in the group are not actually doing their own healing. And so, like it's just not helpful sometimes. And so if you want to be of support or whatever for other people, you got to be facing your own stuff. You got to be honest with yourself. You got to deep dive into the bowels of your pain and the crevices of your mind and all of that kind of stuff to really be unearthing and doing your own healing work. A, so that you can be present with other people, but B, because that's not the last thing you're gonna experience, right? Like Stephanie was saying, as soon as you get over one thing, there's another thing and then another thing. And so it becomes majorly important that we are doing our healing work so that when that next thing comes, we aren't jumping off of a bridge somewhere. That's all I got.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bridgeport, for sharing your experiences and just giving us advice and love at the same time. So now we're going to, so if there are people that are listening on Facebook Live, could you please post any questions you have in the comment section and we will get to them. So the Q&A session is for all three of our panelists. And as the first question I have, a child, a teen is grieving and dealing with some type of loss. So what are some signs?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So,
Mr. White, Miss Whitehurst, you're on mute.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
You got it?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
Can you hear me? Okay. They didn't say a specific age, but as I heard some of the question. What are some of the signs that a child is grieving? Was that the question?
A child, an adult, a child, adult, or a teen. So are there
Okay.
general signs that?
Okay. Okay. All right. So anyone is if a person, one of a person is grieving. Uh, well, first of all, changes in their behavior, the presentation. First of all, they may not say that they feel a certain way, but if they have enough cognition, old enough, they may say, "I feel sad," or a young child might say, "My tummy hurts," or they may say one sentence statements about a friend, or they may transpose it over to an animal. If a young child, a stuffed animal, one of their toys, they may not say anything, but you notice change in behavior, eating, overeating, not wanting to eat, sleeping too much, not able to sleep, rambling around at night. For a teenager, engaging in risky behavior, something they wouldn't have even thought of before. Uh, Feeling extremely sad over what they're going through. We really, I recommend, I'm going to be careful with my statements, that we be in touch with what's going on with our youth because, we don't know everything about them. And think about when we were teenagers and we were very good at hiding from our parents what we were doing, some of our activities, because we were all little angels, right? But anyway, recognizing, whereas some of the things that they did every day or activities, they're no longer taking pleasure. Same way with an adult, going through the motions, going to work, but doing the bare minimum, taking care of the family, but not able to engage, not able to have a conversation. And look at the obvious: crying, excessive crying, or a flat affect. A flat affect is where the face is just what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Flat. No emotion is shown. So, those are some of the signs with our mature persons stating, "Why am I still here? I wish my dad had said oftentimes about going with my mother, and I try to process what's going on with him. Is he feeling sadness, or is it just a conversation? Don't pick it apart. But you ask the question. It's okay to ask someone, how are you feeling, and like I say, some signs are obvious and some are not. But let the person know that you are there to listen to them. I hope
Thank you very
hope
much.
that
Would
answers.
anyone else like to expound on that question?
Yeah, one of the things that Miss Stephanie also talked about is recognizing your child, and in that recognition of the child, you can also get a sense of feeling. Allow yourself to feel the child. Allow yourself to be in tune with not what the child can say or hasn't said or would say, but just your heart feeling. Parents, if they've been remiss or disconnected from the child for whatever reason, they actually have what you call a genetic code that speaks to the child. So you can feel your child's pain and suffering. You may not know how to discern it from yourself, and that maybe be a little bit confusing, but you can definitely feel when a child is disconnected from themselves. And the one way to really tell that child is hug it. Because when you hug your child, no matter how old or whatever, when you hug your child, you get a sense of what you call a vibration from your child. That child will give you a signal in their body whether something is wrong. And that's if a child is unable to speak. If a child's unable to speak because they're too young, there are things happening in the vibration of your hug. That's why we have healing hugs. That's why we have transmission of hugs. That's why we love, we embrace. And in that embrace, there's a lot of information.
Thank you for sharing. So another question that we had, I guess, would you give to a person that may have suicidal thoughts due to the loss of something or someone?
Well, Erica had said in this very succinctly, and I just want to say, you're just a beautiful, amazing woman that we have in our world, and we need to embrace a lot of them, and all the people who are taking care of each other, but listening and being there and being quiet. Sometimes just shut up and be there, because the thing about suicide is that if you say the wrong thing, and you probably will if you're not a professional, they're going to commit suicide off of what you said, even though you meant for it to be caring. And it's going to come out sideways. I'm just telling you. But what you can do is you can be there, and you can make the call to the 911. You can make the call to the hotline. You can make the call to the police officer and say, I am going to be here with you, but I am going to be quiet. And that's all you have to say, is that we're going to be here together. So that's enough, and then get them the help that they're going to need, because saving a life is very important.
I would like to add to that. So I tried to kill myself on December 4th of 2004, and I spent 7 days on the psych ward. And I don't know what somebody could have said to me, because I wasn't saying anything. That it was a shock to everybody. Like, I was scheduled to show. There was a group of mediators waiting for me to come and give them a 5-hour training that day, and I just didn't show up at the training. And people were like, there were no indications from anybody that that I would do anything like that. So sometimes you don't necessarily know that that's where somebody's mind might go. And I didn't know it until that day, in that moment, that I was just done, But what I will say is, my children, specifically my youngest child, she's turning 21 in November. Her and I often talk about how her and I both feel a little hardwired to leave here. There are some of us who we kind of feel like an alien in this realm, and there are constant things that happen in our society, I think mostly, that we, being as empathetic or, spiritually sensitive or whatever, we're constantly absorbing so much stuff. And so I learned when I went through the Roper Academy around trauma, I learned that trauma is not stored in the same part of our brain where we have language. And so often talk therapy and talking it out might not be as good as doing other kinds of things to actually target where trauma is stored. So trauma is stored in our body memory. Trauma is stored in our, smelling sensory. Trauma is stored, and all of that kind of stuff. And so it's often more helpful when people have like music therapy and art therapy and stuff like that. And so like asking a child, well, what color do you feel? If you feel how you feel right now was a color, what would that be? Or, draw a picture of how you're feeling in your family right now. And so, like, notice they draw everybody else really big and they make themselves really small. Or they draw a picture of outside and the clouds are black instead of blue. Or, like, whatever. Or engaging people with art and music can be really helpful as well. And so what I do when I notice that my child is depressed, so in 2019, she was crying in the shower, and then she went in her room, and I just walked in there, and I just flat out asked, because I had been in that moment of not wanting to be here, I recognized the sound in her cry. The tone of voice of her cry sounded like, if I leave this house, she was supposed to be getting ready for work, but the way she was crying, I knew that if I left the house thinking she's just going to get herself together and go to work, I was going to come home and find my child dead later today. And so I stopped everything, and this is where our experiences can serve us, right? Because maybe had I not had my own suicide attempt, I wouldn't have noticed the tone of voice in her cry. And so I just walked right into her room, and I said, do you still want to be alive or not? And her response was, I'm afraid to answer the question. And I said, okay, say no more. And I dressed her and took her to the hospital. And she, treated it like triage. When she came home, you know, like intensive care unit. When she came home, our house was an intensive care unit, and I invited all my women friends to come around her, and you know, like, and people just pour into her, and different times when she's struggling and going through things. We do that. So yesterday she was having a hard time. I called her godmother to come over here, and her godmother brought art, and they, you know, were doing art together. So really learning about how trauma impacts people, so that when somebody you love is at the brink of making a decision about whether or not to take their life, you might actually have some helpful things to offer. But always don't be afraid to just take people to the hospital.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Stephanie, you're muted. I think you're trying to say something.
It's still on mute.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, there you go.
Am I unmuted? Am I still muted?
Yes, you are.
We can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay.
We
I
can
just
hear
wanted
you.
to add to that what Dr. Dyer and Sister Erica said is true. One of the things, having worked in inpatient psychiatry, that what I learned and I saw and experienced is, first of all, if there are signs and if the person expresses, you know, feelings of suicide, you take them seriously. I don't care even if they say it in a joking way, you always take it seriously. Do not go into any judgment. And as Sister Erica say, I was one of those ones that said, and I'm going to take you by the hand and we're going to the hospital. You know, in social work school, University of Maryland, they went through all that with us. You know, you ask them, do you have a plan? And you know, what is your plan? And there's like a list of questions. And I've done that also. But there have been times when you can get, I think what Dr. Dyer was saying, you could sense it. Sister Erica said she felt it from her daughter. You don't have time for all of that. You want to show them caring, concern, like I said, no judgment right then, and we're going to the hospital together. And then afterward, I love that her house became the hospital. Let our homes be safe and nurturing and therapeutic as well. Get whatever services you need and treatment in there. And I made a note somewhere to remove the shame and the stigma. You know, a lot of that has contributed, those feelings of shame and stigma have contributed to someone trying to again, and trying the suicide attempt again. One of the things that I also lastly like to say is, having been as a Christian and being raised in the church, and I know a lot of things have changed in these 60 almost plus years that I've been on earth. There was once upon a time, I know in my denomination, where people were made to feel bad if they didn't just pray about it and pray it away. And I don't think we hear a lot of that now, but there may be still some dogmatic folks. And we, as people of faith, no matter what your belief is, your faith system is, I like what Sister Erica said, we need to show them the love. If we believe in the Creator, we need to show them the love to say, whatever it is, I don't have the answer, but I want to take your hand, you know, and walk with you in this. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you very much. I just quickly wanted to mention the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. It is 1-800-273-8255. Again, 1-800-273-8255. And for anyone who is going through grief and loss to the point where you are feeling suicidal, we just want to let you know that you are not alone. You have people that are there for you. You have people that you can call this number, people that will speak to you and will talk you through things, and will just, even if you need them to sit on the phone and just kind of just in silence, to have that presence of the person there with you, they will do that for you as well. So before we kind of wrap things up, I do want to ask a question about what are some other resources for families, for adults, for children, dealing with grief and loss. So if you know any tangible resources that people can go and look up or visit, could you provide that to us, please?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Yes, we can
Okay,
hear you.
so I will absolutely put this in my PowerPoint, and I'm sure Dr. Dyer and Sister Erica may have the same. But many of us are already familiar with Roberta's house, of course, and the great work that they do. We hear about it with children, but they do work with all ages. The Loyola Clinical Center is up at Loyola College in Maryland. I think they've been new name since I was there, but they do have at their clinics. They have they offer services and specifically grief groups. Compassionate Friends is an excellent organization. Their primary response is to women who had suffered loss of a child. I'm sorry, not just women, parents who suffered the loss of a child through death. They even go to miscarriage. The child can be an adult child. They are excellent. They are in the Maryland area. NAMI, with the National Alliance of the Mentally Ill, is another organization that is in our area. The organization that I'm proud to work with, AGS Programs, which stands for Achieving Your Greatest Self. We have psychologists, psychiatrists, medication management, group work, grief groups, all type of individual services, PRP, psychiatric rehab services. They are excellent. Pastoral Counseling Services of Maryland is another, and I will add some others to the list. And of course, we know that the Well Foundation is there as well. I tell folks, some people say, I don't know where to start. First of all, we have to take care of our health. So everyone should have a primary provider, your homeopathic doctors, whatever. So start with your carer, your provider, your health provider, with them, and let them know how you're feeling. Maybe get some referrals from them as well. Everybody feels differently about medication, and I think it's diet. We have to look at diet, maybe in conjunction with medication, in conjunction with therapy, in conjunction with support, because there are many support groups out there, and then your own personal team of support. So that's what I have to say about that.
Thank you very much. And we will also, in addition to Ms. Whitehurst's PowerPoint, we'll also put everything on the Well Foundation Facebook page. So, do any of our presenters have any final comments?
I just want to add.
Like to share?
I just want to add one thing, and it's about what Erica had said. Sister Erica had said about the frankincense and sage. Some people had wonder why that works, and I just want to add some enlightenment on that. Being studying shamanism for many years, is that the sage attaches to the negative energy of the earth, right? And it pulls it down. The sage actually attaches to the negative energy, and it pulls it down to the earth so it can grow into a plant. And so it has a rebirth to it. That's what sage does. The frankincense has a connection to the spiritual world, meaning that it allows the soul to release into the universe. So other spirits and souls are allowed to embrace what the frankincense is doing. That's why they've been doing it for thousands of years and using frankincense and sage. And then when you add myrrh, if you ever want to add myrrh, it allows for the loving embrace of the universe. So that's why so many religious settlements have used frankincense and myrrh, and that was the calling of our ancestral gods from the past, present, and future. So I love that.
Can you say that last thing about myrrh one more time? You made my whole head pop off right now. So I want to just thank you very much for articulating this so clearly. But what did you say, myrrh? like it embraces. What did you say? I'm sorry.
It embraces our ancestral past from the past, present, and future. So that's what it does. So that's what myrrh does. It connects the lineage of it.
Shut up. It embraces the ancestral. Oh my goodness. So we could talk for like another hour just about this, but I'm gonna be quiet now.
Erica, you got my number. We're gonna.
Thank you so
Hey.
much for sharing that, Dr. Dyer. Would anyone else like to share?
I was just showing this. I don't know if you
Would
all
anyone
can
like
see
to
this.
share any final comments?
Yeah, I would. I would like to offer a final comment. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Sister Erica had said something about, I forget, adding 15 more hours, whatever, on to just talk about the mirror. But there's so much to this. This is, there's so much we can delve into. We are not even, I think we're just striking the surface of this. I am appreciative that the Wall Foundation is having this because in our society and even in our communities and communities of color, we have, I'm using the global we, have gotten to the point where people are told to not talk about things. There's nothing wrong with having things. There's nothing wrong with obtaining things, but obtain the material things. Shut down your feelings. Someone said something about parents working, and providing for the children and providing, but not having the time. And there are young people that are grieving that time and relationship with the parent. So there's so much more that I think that we could get into, but I think this is just striking the surface. I think it's really good. We have got to come out of denial. We have got to come out of denial and say everything's fine, and I'm Superwoman, and I'm Superman, and I'm not feeling this grief. That's another factor that I have seen in my work that's led people to feel that they needed to end their life, and they needed to shut down, and just give up. So, I don't know what the Wall Foundation is planning to do. This has been a rich opportunity, these sessions, to really explore a lot of what's going on. And we talk about it in the time of COVID. This is not the end. You all know that.
Right.
Whether we have a resurgence of COVID, whether the flu gets crazy, or whether something else comes out of Pandora's box, we need to be able to talk about how we deal with the emotions that we experience of going through this, because it could be another pandemic. It doesn't need to be a pandemic. It could just be something else. It could just be life, and the traumas of life. So I look forward to us getting together and doing more of this. And thank you for the opportunity.